The icy winds of Nirel whipped across the colony, carrying small shards of frozen air that stung the skin. Humans had built their settlement on the planet's southern plains, far from the towering ice cliffs. It was here that the underground facility had been discovered, hidden beneath layers of frozen rock. No one knew who had built it or why it had been abandoned. The discovery caused a mix of fear and curiosity among the colony's scientists. Myra, a young caretaker, was chosen to explore the facility. She was calm, patient, and had a gentle way with creatures. The moment she stepped through the heavy metal door, she felt a strange silence. The air was cool and dry. The walls glowed faintly with embedded lights, illuminating rows of small cages. Inside each cage, she saw a cub. The cubs were unlike anything she had seen. They had soft, fluffy fur in colors ranging from pale silver to deep brown. Their eyes were large, shining with intelligence, yet empty in emotion. They moved with careful, precise motions, almost mechanical. Myra's heart tightened. These creatures were alive, but they seemed to have never known warmth or care. "Hello," Myra whispered, stepping closer. The cubs watched her silently. Some tilted their heads, as if studying her, but none approached or reacted. She knelt before the first cage, touching the glass lightly. "I am Myra. You are safe here." The cub stared back with its big eyes, blinking slowly. Myra could feel no fear, no recognition, no joy. It was as if the cub existed without feeling. Myra spent the first hour simply observing. She noted the way they moved, how they ate, and the careful way they avoided contact with each other. Some curled into corners, others sat stiffly, staring at the walls. She spoke softly, repeating simple words. "You are safe. I am Myra. Your name will help me know you." Still, the cubs remained unmoved. By the second day, Myra began introducing small routines. She carried warm blankets for each cub, setting them gently in their cages. She rolled glowing spheres across the floors, letting the cubs watch. A few reached out with delicate paws but pulled back quickly. Myra smiled at the tiny effort. "You can trust me," she said. The cubs tilted their heads again but did not respond with emotion. Myra realized these cubs were not wild animals. They were intelligent, aware, but somehow shut off from feelings. She thought about the word love and wondered if they could ever understand it. The scientists who accompanied her were focused on biology and survival. They measured growth rates, watched their movements, and logged every detail. Myra's focus was different. She wanted the cubs to know care, to feel warmth, and to learn their names. The days passed slowly. Myra spoke to them each morning and evening. She touched their fur when they allowed, always gentle, never forcing. Some cubs would follow her hand with their eyes. Some would move closer to the glass. Small signs, barely noticeable, told Myra that they were beginning to notice her as more than a stranger. One evening, Myra brought a small mirror. She held it up to the first cub, Rin. "This is you," she said. Rin stared at the reflection, then blinked. Myra smiled. The cub did not understand fully, but it recognized something familiar. The other cubs watched from their cages, curious, their eyes reflecting the dim light of the room. Myra wrote in her journal that night. She described each cub, their size, the color of their fur, and the small movements they made when she spoke. She noted Rin's reaction to the mirror. She wrote, "They are not empty. They are waiting." Her heart was full of hope. The cubs had never felt love. They had never been touched, never called by name, never told they were safe. Myra understood that she was not only caretaker but teacher. She was the bridge between their world of silence and the human world of emotion. As Myra turned off the lights for the night, the cubs settled into their cages. Some huddled together, others remained alone. The room was quiet, but Myra felt a presence. The cubs were watching, learning in their own way. She whispered softly, "Tomorrow, we will try again. I will call your names, and you will know me." Myra left the nursery with a mixture of excitement and concern. She knew this was only the beginning. The cubs were waiting for something they had never known. Myra promised herself she would awaken it. She would teach them care, and maybe one day, they would feel love. The next morning, Myra returned to the underground nursery. The icy wind outside howled over the colony, but inside the facility, the air was calm. The cubs were awake, their bright eyes shining in the soft light. They watched her as she entered. Myra felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Today, she would try something new. She carried a small board with symbols and names written clearly. She knelt in front of Rin's cage and spoke softly. "This is Rin," she said, pointing at the first symbol. Rin blinked and tilted its head, watching her carefully. Myra repeated the name several times, then waited. Rin moved slightly closer to the bars, its tiny paws reaching toward her hand. Myra smiled gently. "Yes, Rin. That is your name." She moved to the next cub, Liko. Liko had pale silver fur and watched her silently. Myra called its name clearly, showing the symbol. Liko mimicked the sound, making a small, uncertain noise. Myra's heart lifted. The cubs were beginning to recognize themselves. Slowly, she went from cage to cage, introducing each cub by name: Yaru, Tima, Sorrow, and Fina. Some tried to mimic her sounds. Others only watched. None yet showed emotion, but Myra did not mind. Small attention was progress. The cubs followed her movements with growing interest. Myra noticed subtle changes in their behavior. Rin and Liko leaned toward her when she spoke. Yaru batted at a small glowing ball she rolled across the floor. Tima tilted its head and made a soft sound when Myra said its name. Even Sorrow, who usually sat stiffly in the corner, shifted closer to the light. Myra spent hours with them that day. She spoke each name clearly, pointing to the cub and the symbol. She repeated the names gently, one by one, watching for any reaction. Each small gesture was a victory. The cubs had never been called by their names before. They had never felt a connection to themselves or to anyone else. Myra understood that names were the first bridge to care. When the human scientists entered, Myra explained her method. "I am teaching them their names," she said. "It is not just recognition. It is the first step to awakening feelings." The scientists watched with curiosity. One measured the cub's eye movements while another noted vocal attempts. "They are intelligent," said a scientist quietly. "But emotion is not yet present." Myra nodded. She knew it would take time. Patience was the key. By evening, Myra began simple exercises. She held a glowing orb and called Rin's name. Rin reached for it, touching it carefully with its paw. Myra laughed softly. "Good, Rin. You understand." She repeated the process with Liko, Yaru, and the others. They were learning that names meant attention and recognition. For the first time, the cubs were connecting their actions with the words Myra spoke. Myra noticed something remarkable. When she called their names, the cubs' ears twitched and their eyes brightened. They still did not smile or make sounds of joy, but they were responding. Myra whispered to herself, "It is working. They understand me. They know I am here." She could feel hope growing in her chest. The cubs also began to watch each other. Rin's small movements drew the attention of Liko. Yaru's curious batting of the orb made Tima tilt its head. Even Sorrow moved slightly, glancing at Fina. Myra realized they were learning not only from her but from each other. Their intelligence was growing, and a faint spark of curiosity was appearing. That night, Myra sat alone in the quiet nursery. She wrote in her journal about each cub's progress. Rin and Liko had shown the strongest recognition. Yaru and Tima were beginning to explore gestures and movements. Sorrow and Fina were more cautious but attentive. Myra felt a quiet satisfaction. She understood that this was only the beginning, but it was an important beginning. She looked at the rows of cubs sleeping peacefully in their cages. The room felt warmer than before, not because of the lights or the heaters, but because of the connection she had begun to build. Myra whispered softly, "Tomorrow, we will try more. We will speak your names and see what happens. I promise, you will understand care." Outside, the wind howled over the icy plains, but inside the facility, a quiet energy moved through the cubs. They were watching, learning, and slowly waking to something new. Myra felt certain that with time, patience, and gentle attention, the cubs would know more than just their names. They would know connection, curiosity, and perhaps, one day, love. For the first time, Myra felt that the impossible was possible. She had begun to awaken life in the cubs that had been frozen for so long. She left the nursery with a light step, ready to return the next morning and continue calling their names, one by one, until the cubs understood that someone cared for them. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the underground facility, casting a soft glow on the nursery. Myra stepped inside carrying a small tray of food and a glowing orb. The cubs were already awake, their large eyes watching her carefully. Today, Myra felt a quiet excitement in her chest. She had a plan to take their learning one step further. She placed the tray on the floor and called out, "Rin, Liko, Yaru, Tima, Sorrow, Fina. This is for you." The cubs stepped forward slowly, each one curious but cautious. Myra smiled. "Good. This is a gift. I give it to you because I care." She knelt down, letting the cubs approach her at their own pace. Rin moved first, sniffing the tray, then touched her hand gently. Myra held her breath. It was a small gesture, but it was a beginning. After feeding them, Myra picked up the glowing orb. She rolled it gently across the floor, calling each cub's name as she did. "Rin, catch the light. Liko, follow it. Yaru, touch it." Rin reached for the orb and tapped it. Liko batted it lightly with its paw. Yaru leaned closer, eyes wide, and touched it with curiosity. Myra laughed softly. The cubs were engaging, reacting to both her words and the movement of the orb. For the first time, Myra decided to try something she had not dared before. She knelt in the center of the room, holding the orb close to her chest, and whispered softly, "I am Myra. I care for you. You are safe. I am your friend." Rin paused, looking directly at her. Its ears twitched. Liko moved closer. Myra repeated the words, one cub at a time. Then something extraordinary happened. Rin's large eyes glimmered with a strange light. It made a soft, trembling sound. Myra's heart leapt. She spoke to Rin gently, calling its name. Rin inched closer, touching her hand with its tiny paw. Myra felt a warmth spread through her chest. The cub was responding not just to words, but to care. The other cubs began to notice. Liko tilted its head, mimicking Rin's movement. Yaru stepped closer to Myra, then froze. Tima, Sorrow, and Fina watched, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Myra spoke softly to each one, calling their names and offering gentle touches. Slowly, one by one, the cubs responded. Their movements were small, cautious, but meaningful. Myra realized she was witnessing the first spark of emotion in the cubs. They had never felt warmth, trust, or attention like this before. Their reactions were subtle, a soft sound, a twitch of the ears, a paw reaching out. It was enough. Myra whispered to herself, "They feel it. They are beginning to understand care." For hours, she repeated the exercise. She called their names, offered gentle touches, and allowed the cubs to explore the glowing orb and the space around them. She did not force them. She let them choose how close to come, letting each cub move at its own pace. The nursery, once quiet and empty, now hummed with attention and curiosity. By afternoon, Rin and Liko were following Myra around the room, touching her hands and sniffing at her hair. Yaru batted at the glowing orb while occasionally looking at Myra for approval. Tima, Sorrow, and Fina remained more cautious, but they were watching everything with wide, intelligent eyes. Myra felt a deep satisfaction. These small signs were proof that her patience and care were working. When the human scientists returned, Myra shared what she had observed. Ren made a sound and touched my hand. Liko followed closely. The others are watching and learning. They are responding to attention and care. The scientists were amazed. One remarked, "This is beyond intelligence. They are awakening to emotion." Myra nodded, knowing this was only the first spark. As night approached, Myra sat in the quiet nursery, writing in her journal. She described each cub's behavior, noting the small movements and sounds that indicated the beginning of awareness. Ren's trembling sound, Liko's careful steps, Yaru's curious touches, each was a step towards something extraordinary. Myra whispered softly, "Tomorrow, we will try again. You will understand more, and I will help you feel the care you never knew." The cubs settled in their cages, some huddled together while others remained alone. Myra dimmed the lights and left the room quietly, knowing the cubs were thinking, learning, and perhaps even dreaming. For the first time, the nursery felt alive with the presence of beings awakening to the world in a way they never had before. Myra looked back once before closing the door, seeing Rin's bright eyes fixed on her. A tiny spark of something new shone in the cub's gaze. Myra smiled, knowing that this spark would grow. The cubs had never felt love before, but with patience, care, and gentle attention, that first spark was about to become something far greater. The days passed slowly in the underground nursery, but Myra could see the change in the cubs with each sunrise. They were no longer just watching her silently. Small signs of curiosity and attention appeared in their movements. Rin and Liko followed her wherever she walked, tilting their heads and reaching out tiny paws. Yaru and Tima observed carefully, sometimes touching objects she offered. Even Sorrow and Fina, the most cautious of all, were beginning to respond to her voice. Myra had prepared a new activity for the cubs. She set small glowing spheres in a circle on the floor. "This is for you," she said softly, calling each cub by name. "Touch it, explore it, have fun." Ren leaped forward first, tapping a sphere and watching it glow brighter. Liko batted at another, rolling it gently. Yaru sniffed a third one, then pushed it with a tiny paw. Myra smiled, seeing them experiment and imitate each other's movements. She knelt in the middle of the circle, speaking softly. "You can touch, you can play, you can explore. I am here. I care for you." Her words, calm and patient, seemed to have a quiet effect. The cubs watched her closely, learning the rhythm of her voice. Some moved closer, reaching toward her hands. Myra let them, holding her palms open, offering gentle contact. Slowly, the cubs began to recognize her not just as a caretaker, but as someone who cared for them. Myra began giving each cub its name more frequently. "Rin, come here. Liko, touch this. Yaru, look at me." The repetition helped the cubs associate their names with attention and care. Rin now responded quickly, rushing to Myra when she called. Liko hesitated only briefly. Yaru and Tima experimented with moving closer and watching Myra for guidance. Even Sorrow, who usually stayed at the edge, took a small step forward. Myra's heart lifted with every gesture. The cubs started showing new behaviors. Rin nuzzled Myra's hand when she called its name. Liko tried to imitate the sounds Myra made, letting out soft, high-pitched noises. Yaru batted at Myra's fingers, exploring the warmth and motion. Tima curled slightly against the light from a glowing sphere, observing the comfort Myra offered. The once empty nursery was now filled with movement, curiosity, and tentative trust. Myra noticed something remarkable. The cubs were beginning to notice each other in a new way. Rin and Liko sometimes played side by side, touching the spheres together. Yaru and Tima imitated each other's movements, learning from one another. Even Sorrow and Fina, the slowest to respond, occasionally glanced at their companions and shifted their positions to stay closer. The cubs were forming connections not just with Myra, but with each other. To strengthen these small bonds, Myra introduced gentle exercises. She held her hands in the air and asked the cubs to reach, encouraging movement and cooperation. Rin and Liko moved quickly, while Yaru watched and followed after a pause. Tima tried, stumbling slightly, but kept going. Myra clapped softly when the cubs succeeded, and even Sorrow moved closer, drawn by the sound of encouragement. The cubs were learning the meaning of attention, care, and gentle praise. At the end of the day, Myra sat quietly on the floor. The cubs gathered near her, some leaning lightly against her legs, others sitting close, watching. Myra gently stroked Rin's fur, then Liko's, noticing their tiny reactions, a twitch of the ear, a soft sound, a paw pressing lightly against her hand. She whispered to herself, "They are beginning to understand. They feel trust. They are learning care." Myra's journal that night recorded every detail. Rin and Liko were the most responsive. Yaru and Tima were experimenting, learning from each other and from her. Sorrow and Fina were cautious but attentive, showing that even the most hesitant could awaken to connection with patience. Myra felt hope. She could see the first threads of emotional awareness forming. As Myra dimmed the lights, the cubs settled around her. Some huddled together, enjoying warmth from each other's presence. Rin's small paw rested on Liko's shoulder, a gesture of trust. Yaru and Timo leaned toward the glowing spheres, comforted by the light and Myra's gentle voice. Even Sorrow moved closer to Fina, a small but meaningful step. The nursery, once silent and cold, now held a quiet life. Myra felt the energy of the cubs as they explored, observed, and slowly opened their hearts. For the first time, she realized that they were not just learning names and actions. They were beginning to understand connection, care, and trust. Myra left the room that night feeling a mixture of pride and quiet excitement. She knew the cubs were moving closer to something greater than curiosity. They were on the path to emotion, to understanding care, and perhaps, one day, to love. As she closed the door, Rin's bright eyes followed her. Myra smiled softly. The small bonds had begun, and the cubs were ready for the next step. The morning sun sent pale light through the small openings in the underground nursery. Myra entered quietly, carrying a tray of warm food and a soft cloth. The cubs were awake, their large eyes fixed on her. Today felt different to Myra. She could sense it in the gentle movements of Rin and Liko. Something was shifting, and she hoped the cubs were ready for a step she had long awaited. Myra knelt on the floor, calling each cub's name clearly. Rin, Liko, Yaru, Tima, Sorrow, Fina. Come to me. Rin stepped forward, sniffing her hand and brushing it with a soft paw. Liko followed closely. The others watched carefully, their curiosity growing. Myra spoke gently, her voice calm and steady. I am Myra. I care for you. You are safe. You are special. She held her hands open, inviting the cubs to come closer. One by one, they approached. Rin pressed lightly against her palm. Liko rested its small head on her arm. Yaru, Tima, Sorrow, and Fina followed, touching her cautiously. Myra whispered their names repeatedly, letting them hear the sound of their own identity spoken with care. Then Myra did something she had not tried before. She called each cub by its name and added words of affection. Rin, you are my friend. Liko, you are important to me. Yaru, I care for you. Tima, you are safe. Sorrow, Fina, You are loved. She watched carefully. Something small flickered in Rin's eyes. A tiny tremble ran through its body. Myra held her breath. Rin made a soft sound, like a quiet cry. Myra touched Rin gently, whispering, "It is okay. You are safe. You are loved." Liko tilted its head, eyes wide, and a tear slid down its small face. Myra's heart tightened with emotion. The cubs, who had never known care or attention, were feeling something new. They did not understand the words fully, but they understood the feeling behind them. One by one, the cubs began to respond. Yaru let out a soft sound, Tima's eyes shimmered with moisture, and even sorrow pressed its small body against Fina. Myra's gentle voice continued to call their names, repeating the words of care and safety. The cubs moved closer, their tiny bodies trembling with the first awareness of emotion. Myra could feel warmth spreading through the room. The first tears were the most extraordinary. Rin cried softly, Liko followed, and soon Yaru and Tima were doing the same. Sorrow and Fina, slower to respond, pressed their faces against the floor and made soft sounds. Myra sat quietly among them, letting them feel the connection, the recognition of care. The cubs had never cried before. They had never felt the depth of being seen and loved. Myra stroked their fur gently, whispering each name again. Rin, Liko, Yaru, Tima, Sorrow, Fina. You are my friends. You are loved. The cubs leaned against her, trembling and making soft, unfamiliar noises. Myra's eyes filled with tears as well. She had longed for this moment, waited patiently for it, and now it had come. For hours, Myra stayed with the cubs. She let them move freely, touch her hands and arms, and explore the small space around her. They still did not fully understand their feelings, but they knew they were safe. They knew they were cared for. Each soft cry, each gentle touch, was a step toward awakening the emotions the cubs had never known. By evening, the cubs had settled around her. Rin and Liko rested their heads on her lap. Yaru curled near her side. Tima, Sorrow, and Fina huddled together, their small bodies trembling but calm. Myra whispered softly, "You are loved. You are safe. I care for you." The cubs made soft sounds of agreement, their eyes bright with awareness. Myra wrote in her journal that night, describing every movement, every soft cry, every tear. She noted the first signs of emotional recognition in Rin, Liko, and the others. She knew this was the beginning of something extraordinary. The cubs had felt love for the first time. They had cried not from fear or pain, but from the first understanding of care and attention. As Myra left the nursery, she looked back at the cubs. Their eyes followed her, bright and shimmering. She felt a deep satisfaction and hope. The cubs had begun their journey from silence and emptiness to awareness and emotion. Tomorrow, they would grow closer. Tomorrow, they would continue to discover the warmth of connection and the meaning of love. The underground nursery, once cold and quiet, now held a soft, glowing energy. The cubs had begun to understand care, trust, and the feeling of being seen. Myra smiled, knowing that their first cry was only the start of a lifetime of learning and bonding. The nursery felt alive in a way it never had before. The cubs were no longer quiet observers or cautious creatures. They moved with curiosity and subtle joy. Rin and Liko ran across the floor chasing the glowing spheres Myra had set in a circle. Yaru and Tima experimented with patterns on the wall, tapping and watching the reflections. Even Sorrow and Fina, once the most hesitant, explored the room slowly, learning from their companions. Myra watched them with a soft smile. She knelt in the center of the nursery and called each cub's name. Rin, Liko, Yaru, Tima, Sorrow, Fina. Today, we will play together. The cubs responded immediately. Rin brushed against her hand. Liko pressed its head lightly against her leg. Yaru and Tima moved closer, ready to interact. Sorrow and Fina stayed near each other but shifted slightly toward Myra. Myra began gentle exercises to encourage cooperation. She held two glowing spheres and showed the cubs how to roll them toward each other. Rin and Liko understood quickly, pushing the spheres to one another. Yaru and Tima watched, then imitated the movements. Sorrow and Fina, observing carefully, eventually nudged the spheres together. Myra laughed softly, clapping her hands in encouragement. Good. Very good. You are learning together. The cubs began responding to each other as much as to Myra. Rin would nudge Liko, and Liko would roll a sphere back. Yaru tapped Tima's paw gently, inviting a playful response. Sorrow and Fina occasionally glanced at their friends, mimicking small movements. Myra realized that the cubs were forming their own small community. They were learning connection, empathy, and teamwork. Myra also introduced simple songs. She hummed softly, calling each cub's name in rhythm. Rin and Liko lifted their heads, listening carefully. Yaru and Tima made soft sounds in response, attempting to match the melody. Sorrow and Fina, hesitant at first, finally joined with quiet notes. Myra felt her heart swell. The cubs were not only learning names and care, they were experiencing joy, music, and interaction. Throughout the day, Myra encouraged exploration. She placed small objects and textures around the nursery for the cubs to investigate. Rin sniffed a soft cloth while Liko pawed at a shiny sphere. Yaru and Tima examined patterns on the wall. Sorrow and Fina approached cautiously but eventually touched and nudged the items. Myra spoke to them gently, praising their curiosity. You are clever. You are learning. You are growing. By evening, the cubs were resting near Myra. Rin curled against her lap. Liko pressed its head against her arm. Yaru and Timo leaned close to her side. Sorrow and Fina stayed near the wall but touched Myra's hand when she reached toward them. Myra stroked their fur gently, whispering their names and words of care. Rin, Liko, Yaru, Tima, Sorrow, Fina. You are safe. You are loved. You are my friends. The cubs responded softly, making gentle sounds and pressing closer. Myra wrote in her journal, noting the cubs' emotional growth. Rin and Liko were the most expressive. Yaru and Tima were learning quickly through observation and interaction. Sorrow and Fina, though cautious, were showing signs of trust and curiosity. Myra realized that patience and gentle attention had unlocked a world inside the cubs they had never known. They were growing together emotionally and socially. The next morning, the cubs greeted Myra with energy. Rin and Liko ran toward her, brushing against her legs. Yaru and Tima followed closely, experimenting with playful movements. Sorrow and Fina moved closer, their hesitation replaced by curiosity. Myra laughed softly, kneeling to greet them. She called each cub's name, praising them for their cooperation and small achievements. The cubs responded with soft sounds, tails wagging, and ears twitching. Myra introduced new games, encouraging problem-solving and teamwork. She rolled the glowing spheres in patterns that required the cubs to work together. Rin pushed a sphere toward Liko, who returned it to Yaru. Yaru nudged Tima, completing a small sequence. Even Sorrow and Fina contributed, nudging spheres toward each other. Myra clapped gently. Excellent. You are learning together. You are caring for each other. As night fell, the cubs rested near her. Myra watched them closely, noticing the growing bonds between the cubs. Rin and Liko groomed each other gently. Yaru and Timo leaned close, touching lightly. Sorrow and Fina stayed together, comforted by their presence. Myra whispered softly, You are learning to love each other. You are learning care. You are growing together. The nursery, once quiet and empty, now hummed with life. The cubs moved, explored, and responded with joy and curiosity. Myra knew that the emotional awakening she had started with names and gentle care had grown into trust, empathy, and playful connection. The cubs had begun to experience the warmth of life fully, and their bonds with her and each other were stronger than ever. Myra left the room that night with a soft smile. She could hear the cubs' gentle sounds, their small movements, and the quiet energy of their shared presence. Tomorrow, they would continue to grow together. Tomorrow, they would explore more, learn more, and feel even more. Myra knew that the cubs had started a journey from silence and emptiness to love and connection, and she was there to guide them every step of the way. The nursery was quiet in the early morning light, but the air was full of energy. The cubs moved freely, exploring the room and each other. Rin and Liko chased a glowing sphere together, their movements quick and playful. Yaru and Tima were experimenting with patterns on the walls, occasionally glancing at Myra for approval. Even Sorrow and Fina, once shy and cautious, approached the center of the room, curious and engaged. The cubs were no longer just learning, they were alive with emotion and connection. Myra entered the room with a soft smile, carrying a tray of food and a new set of toys. She knelt on the floor, calling the cubs by name. Rin, Liko, Yaru, Tima, Sorrow, Fina. Come here. The cubs rushed toward her eagerly. Rin pressed its head against her arm. Liko brushed past her legs. Yaru and Tima leaned close, exploring her hands. Sorrow and Fina moved together, touching her gently. Myra's heart swelled with warmth. She held her hands open, looking at each cub. You are loved. You are safe. You are my family. The words were soft but full of meaning. The cubs responded immediately. Rin and Liko nuzzled her hands. Yaru and Tima made small sounds of joy. Even Sorrow and Fina pressed closer, their eyes bright and shimmering. Myra knew this was the moment they truly understood care. For hours, Myra played with the cubs, guiding them through games and gentle exercises. She rolled glowing spheres, encouraging teamwork. Rin pushed a sphere toward Liko, who nudged it to Yaru. Yaru tapped it to Tima, and finally, Sorrow and Fina completed the sequence together. Myra clapped softly. Excellent. You are working together. You are learning care. You are learning love. The cubs began showing new gestures of affection. Rin groomed Liko's fur gently. Yaru leaned against Tima, pressing its small head softly. Sorrow and Fina huddled together, sharing warmth. Myra watched closely, her eyes filling with tears of joy. The cubs had never known love before, but now they were creating it themselves, expressing it in their own ways. Myra introduced songs again, humming softly while calling each cub by name. Rin and Liko lifted their heads, listening intently. Yaru and Tima responded with soft noises, and even Sorrow and Fina joined in quietly. The room filled with a gentle chorus, strange but beautiful. Myra sang along, her voice weaving with theirs. The cubs' eyes shone, and they pressed closer to her, sharing the comfort and joy of connection. As the day continued, Myra noticed that the cubs were no longer just reacting to her. They were learning to care for each other without guidance. Rin nudged Liko toward a glowing sphere, inviting play. Yaru brushed against Tima, encouraging a gentle touch. Sorrow and Fina, observing their companions, joined in spontaneously. Myra realized the cubs had become a true community, capable of empathy, joy, and cooperation. By evening, Myra sat in the center of the nursery. The cubs gathered around her, some resting their heads on her lap, others leaning against her arms. Rin and Liko pressed close, purring softly. Yaru and Timo leaned together, making small noises of contentment. Sorrow and Fina huddled near the edge, occasionally pressing their tiny paws against Myra. The nursery was warm, alive with the quiet energy of a family. Myra stroked each cub gently, whispering their names. Rin, Liko, Yaru, Tima, Sorrow, Fina. You are my family. You are loved. You are safe. The cubs responded with soft cries, gentle touches, and quiet movements. Their eyes shone with understanding, and Myra felt a deep peace. They had learned to feel love, to give and receive care, and to be part of something greater than themselves. That night, Myra wrote in her journal. She described the cubs' growth, their first tears, their games, their songs, and their gestures of care. She noted how each one had changed from a silent, cautious creature into a being capable of emotion, joy, and connection. Myra smiled as she closed the journal. The cubs were no longer lonely or empty. They had a family, and that family was real, built from patience, care, and love. As Myra left the nursery, she looked back at the cubs one last time. Ren's bright eyes followed her, Liko brushed past her legs, Yaru and Timo leaned together, and Sorrow and Fina pressed against each other. The cubs had never felt love before, but now they knew it. They had cried, they had learned, and they had grown. Myra felt a quiet joy, knowing she had helped awaken something extraordinary. The underground nursery, once cold and silent, was now full of life. The cubs had discovered connection, empathy, and love. They had found family, and Myra had become that family for them. As the lights dimmed and the cubs settled, Myra whispered softly, "We are together. We are family. We are loved." The cubs pressed close, their soft sounds of contentment filling the room. The journey from loneliness to love was complete, and the cubs had found their place in the world at last.